Hey guys, welcome back to more homeowner association stories. In this video, a ridiculous homeowner association let their members park at my private lake, and I am not even part of this HOA. They were all trespassing. Let's dive right into the video. And the first one is a homeowner association story titled, "Am I the jerk for suing my girlfriend's HOA over a ridiculous parking violation interpretation?" So my girlfriend Mara, 26 female, now my wife, used to rent a townhouse with her roommates Kenzie and Thea in one of those cookie-cutter communities governed by an HOA. The place itself was nice enough, but parking was always a nightmare for the actual residents. Ironically, it was usually easier for me as a visitor since they had dedicated guest parking with those hanging permits you put on your rear view mirror. I would stay over maybe once or twice a week, usually arriving Friday evening and leaving for work on Monday morning. This arrangement worked fine for about 7 months until one Monday morning in March I walked out to find my car missing. My first thought was that someone had stolen my beat-up 2013 Honda Civic with its manual transmission. Who steals those anymore, right? Well, I immediately called Mara, who was already at work. "Babe, I think someone stole my car," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What? Are you sure?" Mara sounded worried. "Did you check the towing company's number? There's a sign at the entrance of the lot." After some detective work and several phone calls, I discovered that my car had not been stolen, but instead towed at 6 a.m. that morning. The towing company, Eagle Eye Towing, informed me it would cost $150 to get my car back. When I asked why it was towed, they directed me to contact the HOA directly. So this is where things get interesting. I reached out to the HOA manager, a woman named Marlene. "Yes, your vehicle was reported by one of our board members for visitor parking abuse," she said, sounding like she was explaining something to a child. "Section 361 of our bylaws clearly state that visitors may not park in designated visitor spots for more than 72 hours total." Total? What does that mean exactly? I asked. "It means, young man, that the cumulative time a visitor's vehicle spends in our lot cannot exceed 72 hours, whether consecutive or non-consecutive. You have been parking here regularly for months, which far exceeds the allowed time." I nearly dropped my phone. "Are you saying you're counting all the hours I've ever parked there, adding them up and using that as justification for towing me?" "Precisely," she replied, sounding pleased with herself. "Our board member Douglas has been keeping detailed records of your parking patterns." This struck me as not only absurd but also incredibly creepy. I mean, who spends their time monitoring logging visitors parking like that? I decided to attend the next HOA meeting to dispute this interpretation and request reimbursement for the towing fee. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, which had all the charm of a DMV waiting room. About 15 residents showed up along with the 5-member board, including the infamous Douglas, a retiree in his 60s who looked exactly like the type of person who would spend his free time logging parking violations. When it was my turn to speak, I presented my case and said, "The obvious intent of a 72-hour parking limit is to prevent people from storing vehicles in visitor spots or having long-term guests taking up parking spaces. It is not meant to create a lifetime cumulative limit on visitor parking." Douglas actually pulled out a spreadsheet. "I've documented that your vehicle has spent approximately 892 hours in our visitor lot over the past 7 months. That is more than 37 days worth of parking time." I stood there, dumbfounded by the level of surveillance I'd been under. "So you're telling me that if someone visits their friend for 1 hour every week for 73 weeks, they are violating this policy?" "Rules are rules," Marlene chimed in, adjusting her thick-rimmed glasses. "The bylaw does not specify consecutive hours." Mara, who had come in with me for support, spoke up. "This is ridiculous. I pay rent here and my visitors should be able to use visitor parking as intended. You're twisting the meaning of this rule." The board voted unanimously to deny my reimbursement request. As we left the meeting, I overheard Douglas smugly telling another board member, "These young people need to learn to respect our community standards." Well, that is when I decided to take action. I spent the next week researching similar cases and consulting with a friend who works as a paralegal. She helped me understand that small claims court would be perfect for this situation. The filing fee was only $45 and I did not need a lawyer. When I told Mara about my plan, she was supportive but concerned. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked. "It's only $150. It's not about the money anymore," I replied. "It is about standing up to these power-tripping board members who think they can make up rules as they go." So yes, I filed the lawsuit citing unreasonable interpretation of bylaws and predatory towing practices. The HOA's reaction was priceless. They actually hired a lawyer, probably costing them way more than the $150 they were fighting over. The court date arrived 3 weeks later. I presented my case simply. I showed the judge the bylaw in question, explained the common sense interpretation of a 72-hour limit, and argued that the HOA's cumulative interpretation was unreasonable and against the spirit of the rule. Their lawyer tried to defend the board's interpretation, but the judge was not having it. She actually chuckled when reading their explanation of how they calculated the violation. So theoretically, the judge asked their lawyer if someone visited for 1 hour per week after 72 weeks, they would be permanently banned from ever parking there again? The lawyer stumbled over his words trying to justify their position, but it was clear that he knew how absurd it sounded. The judge ruled in my favor, ordering them to repay the $150 towing fee plus my court costs. But the real victory was watching Douglas and Marlene's faces as their lawyer explained that they would have to pay up. The aftermath was interesting. Word spread through the community and several residents actually thanked me for standing up to the board. Apparently, they had been pulling similar stunts with other rules too. One resident told me that they'd been fined for having excessive holiday decorations because they counted each individual string of lights as a separate decoration. Mara's lease was up 2 months later and we decided to move in together, but definitely not in an HOA community. We got married last month in a beautiful ceremony, and yes, there was plenty of parking for all our guests. Some of our friends think I went overboard by taking them to court over $150. They say I could have just let it go and moved on, but I believe sometimes you need to stand up to petty tyranny, even in small doses. Here is where I need your judgment, Reddit. Was I the a-hole for taking this to small claims court instead of just paying the fine and moving on? To address some common questions, yes, I still have the spreadsheet that Douglas made. It's both hilarious and creepy. Other residents have since successfully fought similar violations using my case as precedent. Number 3, I heard through the grapevine that Douglas resigned from the board 2 months later, claiming personal reasons. And yeah guys, let me know in the comments whether you think OP was the a-hole here or not. I'm very curious about your opinion. I would say that OP is pretty much a hero in my eyes, but maybe you have different opinions. Comment number 1 on Reddit said, not the a-hole. The fact that this Douglas guy kept a spreadsheet of your parking times is giving me serious stalker vibes. Who has that kind of time on their hands? Comment number 2, you are the a-hole. As someone who has served on multiple HOA boards, rules exist for a reason. And yes, oftentimes in the case of HOAs, these rules exist to bully people. He is not entirely wrong there. Anyway, if you are regularly staying overnight, you're essentially a resident and should have registered for resident parking. These rules prevent people from abusing visitor spots that are meant for actual visitors, not quasi-residents. The board was just doing their job protecting community resources. Comment number 3, everyone sucks here. The HOA's interpretation was ridiculous and their tracking method was creepy, but you also should have recognized that staying 2 to 3 nights every week was pushing the boundaries of what constitutes a visitor. The mature thing would have been to work out a compromise or parking arrangement instead of jumping straight to legal action. Both sides turned this into a bigger deal than it needed to be, and everyone ended up wasting time and money. Sometimes being right is not worth the drama it causes. And yeah guys, now let's continue to the amazing title story that is titled HOA let members park at my lake, I towed everyone from my property. And by the way, if you have watched until here, please post some star emojis in the comments if you want to support me. This really helps me because lately there are a lot of bot comments and obviously the bots don't know about the star emojis. It's a really good sign of our community. So I am not even a member of an HOA, but I've got a story about one that tried to take part of my property as their own. So yeah, my house is outside of an HOA that was developed maybe less than 5 years ago. The border's like 2 blocks away from me. They never contacted me about joining up, so I figured my property was far enough away that I didn't have to deal with them. I've got a substantial amount of land that I own, maybe not as large as say a farm or something, but looking out on it, it makes it seem big. A part of that land is taken up by a large lake. It's important to note that although there's not a fence around the lake, there are clear signs around the property that indicate that there shouldn't be any trespassing and that it is private property. Also, the lake is pretty deep, but the water is clear, so you can see down to the bottom on a very sunny day. I've been on this property for over a decade now, and I think the lake has had more maintenance done to it than my actual house. I make sure that the pH levels are healthy, I stock it with fish at the beginning of every year, and I try to plant new things around it that will help the wildlife thrive around my home. I don't go into the lake for swimming, something about that never really settled with me, especially since I know that there's fish in there, but there's a small dock near the southwest point that I like to sit on to just enjoy the nature around me. I do fish from time to time, but I usually let the lake's ecosystem take its course. By the beginning of spring, I can usually see if there's a need to replenish the amount of fish in there. Got a bit off track, but I promise the lake is important. But back to the HOA, so I had started to notice a few people parking near my property that would just walk towards the HOA's neighborhood. They were usually not staying for long, less than an hour, but I did manage to catch someone getting into their car and asking what was going on. Apparently, the HOA is meeting with new residents before they move into the neighborhood, and there seems to be a shortage of parking available around the main office. This did not bother me. The people who were parked on the street and didn't do anything to mess up my property. I figured the influx of new residents would stop after a few weeks, so I just let it go. Well, it was a few weeks later that I came home from a shopping trip to see about 10 cars parked on the grass near the lake. There were a few people walking around my lake, some with kids that were throwing bits of grass and picking the flowers that I had so carefully planted. There was even one woman that had her dog on a leash and let it do its duty on my property without picking it up. I was furious, but I needed to know what was going on before I got angry. Maybe there had been some sort of miscommunication. Maybe my no trespassing signs got knocked over. I wanted to give these people the benefit of the doubt and walked over to a group of them to ask what was going on. One woman explained that the HOA said that this area was okay to park at. I told them that this was my property and she giggled, saying that there had been an announcement at the last HOA meeting about this. I pointed towards where I knew one of the no trespassing signs were and asked if she had seen it when she was pulling up. She said she did, but said that it was most likely left from the last person who owned the property, since the HOA owned this area along with the entire lake. I don't know what expression I had on my face, but the lady looked confused and broke away from the group, cell phone in hand. The other members of the group told me that maybe there had been some sort of miscommunication when I bought the place, but I politely explained that I've had the property for over a decade and the HOA didn't come in until a few years ago. One man told me that I shouldn't try to keep such a wonderful park all to myself, especially since there was a lake that the rest of the HOA community could enjoy. I again told them this was not a park and they were literally on my lawn, but they told me that I was not making sense. You know that feeling you get when your eye twitches involuntarily? That was what was happening to me while I watched people walking around like my property was their own private park. A family had even brought a picnic lunch and were trying to get as close to the dock as they could. My mind was racing. How could this have happened? What did the woman mean that there was a meeting about it? Regardless of what I was trying to understand with all the people in my yard, I knew I needed to take action or all of the work I'd put into my land and the lake was gonna be ruined. So I headed into my house, grabbed my phone and called a towing company. I asked them to bring as many trucks as they could, as there were multiple vehicles on my property that needed to be towed. I grabbed up all of my paperwork from the sale of the house just in case and headed back outside. I gave the HOA residents a chance to leave. I told them that their cars were gonna be towed because they were trespassing on private property, and if they didn't want to be involved in whatever action I took against the HOA for this situation, they should leave. No one did, and a few people just laughed at my threat. So I stood there just watching the group mess up my property until the tow trucks arrived. The company had brought 5 and one of the drivers confirmed that I was the owner of the property. I tried not to smile when one of the drivers started to load up a station wagon. The family that owned it tried to reason with the driver, asking him what he was doing and why he was towing their car. He gave the same explanation I did, but they still did not believe it, demanding that he stop or they would call the police. When the first 2 trucks were gone with cars in tow, the third and fourth loading up, a large car rolled up near where the tow trucks were. Out stepped a woman that looked red in the face. She looked around and when her eyes fell on me, she stomped over. For simplicity's sake, we are gonna call her Karen. Karen, you, what do you think you're doing? Me, I'm getting unwanted vehicles off of my property. Karen, this is not your property. It belongs to the HOA. Me, holding up documents. These are from 10 years ago and indicate the property lines for this place, which I currently still own. And nowhere is there a transfer of property or any documentation that an HOA owns this place. Karen, but that's not what... Wait, hold on. She looks over to the lady that walked away from me with her cell phone. Patty, you were the one who said that this property was public, didn't you? Patty, coming up to us. That's right. Karen, but I saw the no trespassing signs and this guy's got proof. Where did you see that we could use this space? Patty, I mean, it's obvious that he's lying. The HOA's property extends to here, which will allow for members to not just enjoy this park, but to have new places to park. Karen, you said you went over this with the HOA president. Patty, I did. Karen, because last I heard the HOA president was still looking for solutions to the parking problem, even after the last meeting we had. Patty, well, I mean, Karen now pulling out her phone. I'm gonna give him a call right now. Turning to me, I'm sorry about all of this. I will make sure this is set straight. Patty, following after Karen as she walks away, you don't need to call him, just let me explain. By that point, the rest of the tow trucks were back for the remaining cars. The members of the HOA that hadn't been towed were quickly driving away, while the rest were coming up to me to accuse me of making them having to walk home and pay a fine to get their cars back. A few more threatened me with the police, but Karen quickly came back and told the people arguing with me to stop. Karen, we are having an emergency meeting tonight with the board and the HOA president. Please bring any concerns to him and leave this man alone. By the time the cars and the people had left, my property was a bit worse for wear. There were bits of trash along the ground, a few pieces of dog feces that needed to be picked up, but the lake had survived. Some of the plants I had planted needed some TLC or looked like they needed to be replaced. I kept thinking that it would have been a lot worse if I hadn't come back to my house when I did. The next day, I had a visitor. The HOA president stood at my door and apologized profusely for everything that happened the day before. Like Karen had said, there was apparently an issue regarding parking that the board was trying to come up with a solution for. Patty took the situation into her own hands and let slip about my property, claiming that the HOA owned it and that it could be used for public parking. No one fact-checked and the HOA president had not been at that meeting to refute it, so Patty just went along with the lie. The members of the HOA that had parked on his property were required to pay the fines for getting their cars back from the towing place. The HOA president said that no one should be parking on or near my property again, or there would be consequences. He even offered to pay me for additional signage that indicated my property was private. The last I heard, the HOA built a new parking lot to assist with the issue. I had a few of the families apologize to me in person, but not everyone did. I don't really care though. I finally have my lake back and an understanding that no one is gonna mess with my space ever again. So to all HOA members, make sure you are fact-checking and not just blindly following what someone says at a meeting, especially when it comes to someone else's property. And yeah guys, I gotta say, I'm kind of happy about how the situation turned out. To be honest, this HOA was not as bad as all the others we have read about before. A welcome change, let's just say it like that. And the next one is an insane Florida trespasser story. So we got a squatter in a currently flooding investment house in Boca Raton, Florida. I bought this property back in January and it's under construction up until April when work had to stop due to a supply shortage. One of the construction workers notified me a few hours ago that the property was flooding. I asked him to do what he can to mitigate the damage. He then sent me pictures of different door locks and gates chained up. Someone is living in the house and wouldn't let his team in. I called Boca Raton police to report the trespasser and they cannot do anything right now. Not sure what I should do to protect my investment. The property insurance hasn't been updated with the upgrades and still considers the house a 3x1 ranch when it's now a 5x3 two-story with a detached dwelling unit above a garage. Any help is appreciated. I don't live in FL full-time by the way and won't be able to make it back to FL until this coming week. Update: water levels are going down. My plumber is gonna rip down the gate on the back side of the property tonight and try to make entry. He is licensed to carry a concealed weapon and will be carrying. I've left messages at 7 different real estate law offices and I've bought airfare to return Tuesday morning. Update to the squatters in Boca Raton property story. After I last updated the original story, my plumber tore down the back fence and was confronted with a bunch of Haitians. He left and waited for me to get into town. He didn't want to call the police because he has a failure to appear warrant. Tuesday was a long day. As soon as I landed and got into my car, I drove down to my place on Summerland Key to get my AR and other self-defense items. It was Tuesday night before I was back up in Boca Raton. We went to the property around 11 p.m. I approached the back patio door with a rifle in hand and was greeted with someone holding a hammer. They saw my rifle, screamed something in another language, and 6 to 7 of them took off out the front door on foot. The lawyers I talked with on Monday were next to useless and all said it could take several months to reclaim my property. My property is in bad shape. It might be a total loss due to the flooding and Haitians using various closets as bathrooms. I get that life is hard, but it doesn't give people the right to destroy other people's things. Update number 2. I called the police and they wouldn't do anything about it. It would have been great if the police wanted wanted to help me, but nope. My plumber is a good guy who didn't show up for a traffic citation. Obviously, I was not hunting, only carrying for self-defense. Update number 3, I contacted another lawyer recommended by a friend. He specialized in property disputes and, unlike the others, seemed to understand the urgency of the situation. He filed an expedited eviction notice based on Florida's unlawful detainer statute. He explained that while the squatters may have some rights, their blatant property damage would work in my favor. The lawyer also advised me to document everything, the damage, the police reports, and all correspondence with the squatters. He warned me against any further confrontation, emphasizing that it could jeopardize the eviction process. Within a week, the court granted the eviction order. The squatters were given 24 hours to vacate the property. I hired a security company to oversee the eviction and prevent any further damage. The police were also present, ensuring the process went smoothly. The squatters left, leaving behind a mess. The property needed extensive repairs, but at least it was back in my possession. The insurance company was initially reluctant to cover the damages, but my lawyer helped me negotiate a settlement that covered a significant portion of the repair costs. It was a tough experience, but I learned a lot about property rights and the legal system. I also realized the importance of having a good lawyer and a strong support system. I'm rebuilding the property and taking steps to ensure this never happens again. And yeah, Ripestars, that's honestly one of the most infuriating things it seems about the United States. These rights that squatters have, I just cannot comprehend it, honestly. Why would you give any rights to people squatting on other people's property? That just seems like such an oxymoron. If there's a good reason to give squatters rights, please let me know about them in the comments, because I just cannot think of anything. And to end the video, we will read a fantastic malicious compliance story that you don't want to miss. It is titled, "You Cannot Give Me $5?" So the story starts like this. My son's school, for the 100th day of school, asked for the kids to bring in 100 of the same coin. They are gonna be donating the money to the local food pantry, so it's for a good cause, and we are doing pretty good this month, so I decided to give him 100 quarters, which is around $25, to donate. So on lunch, I head to my bank and go in. I'm directed to one of the windows and tell the nice lady that I need to withdraw $25 in quarters. She says okay and goes to get my quarters, and she comes back with 3 rolls of quarters. I can only do $20 or $30. They only come in rolls of $10. I point out that she has a tray of change and ask, "Can you take $5 from the loose change?" But she said, "No, they only come in rolls of $10. Do you want $20 or $30? Okay, I really need the $25, so I ask for the $30. She goes to process my request in the computer at another window and comes back with the 3 rolls of quarters. I then tell her, "Can I go ahead and make a deposit?" She asked, "Of course, how much were you wanting to deposit?" I said, $5 in quarters. The range of emotions that crossed her face as I broke open one of the rolls and began to count out my $5 in quarters was priceless. She then takes it and tells the guy at the other computer that we needed to deposit $5 in quarters back into the account. He asked her what happened, and she told him, "I asked for $25, but rolls only came in $10. He then asked her why she didn't just count out $5 in quarters from the loose change that is on each desk. I just smiled as I waited for my deposit receipt. And yeah guys, if you haven't already, please check out my endless playlist for an insane amount of content, and until then, I will see you again tomorrow.